the most important thing to understand about the Bible is that it is a dream. So let me explain what I mean by that. So essentially, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, they're walking with God, they live in paradise, they're together with God, there is no separation, they live in peace and happiness, and they're provided for, they have everything they need. It's paradise. Until they take the bite from the apple. And the apples hanging in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil are poisoned by the serpent. That's why the serpent wanted Eve to bite the apple, because the serpent knew that it had put its venom into the apple. So once Eve bites that apple, then she falls under the spell of the serpent. She falls under its delusion, which is a psychological delusion from the poison, from the venom. And it's really important to understand that the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is your mind. It's your dualistic, conceptual, intellectual mind. And that's where the serpent dwells, where it whispers to you from all day, all night, for the entirety of your life. The serpent is in the tree of the knowledge of good and life, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is your mind, where it gives you thoughts. That's what the apples are. The apples are thoughts. When you bite into its thoughts, when you bite into the apple, you engage with that thought. You enter into the reality of that thought. And thoughts are delusions. All conceptual abstractions, all thoughts, all the things you think you understand, any understanding you have is a delusion, because God is reality. God is the only thing that is reality. And so it's when you're in the presence of God, which is possible for every living person, to actually be in the living presence of God, and in the love of God, and in the light of God. When you're in the presence of God, that's reality. Anything else is illusion, because only God is real. And so everything else is a mental delusion. Any experience you have that's brought about by your thoughts, any thought you can get into, it's a delusion. Any belief system you enter into, and our belief systems go deep, deep, deep. It's like an onion. We're just on the surface. We think we are giving up a belief system, but actually it's permeated us to the very core, and our belief systems are deeply subconscious, and they steer us in very powerful ways from the very core of our being, and usually by fear. So anyway, as soon as Adam and Eve bit into the apple given to them by the snake, they entered the snake's delusion. And everything that happened from that moment onwards, everything in the Bible, is a dream. Adam and Eve were not expelled from the Garden of Eden because you have not been expelled. The Bible is a psychological text which wants you to understand your relationship with God and what's happened to you. It wants you to understand what's happened to you. So you were the child. You were the child, naked child like Adam or Eve, living in the garden, living in paradise. You had no self-consciousness. You had no understanding of good or evil. You were just living from your heart in the moment. That's you as a child, which is what Adam and Eve represent. They represent you as a child. And then you bit into the apple, which means you entered into the reality of conceptual understanding that you are this separate thing who can control the world and who can make things happen. You enter this delusion of ego. And from that moment, from the moment you enter that delusion, believing that you are this separate entity that could make things happen and control reality, instead of just surrendering your life to God and just being with God all the time, as soon as you entered that delusional reality, everything was a dream. And what God wants to do is wake you up from that dream. It's a dream of separation. It's not real. As I said, God did not expel you from the garden. You are in the garden. You dwell in the garden, but you've come under a delusion, a venomous delusion from the serpent, which you continue to listen to. As long as you're thinking, you're listening to the serpent. All your thoughts, or 99% of your thoughts, come from the serpent. They are delusions And really, the only thoughts that are useful are thoughts which help you put your love into action. The only thoughts which have any function or purpose at all are the thoughts which help you take the love in your heart and get it out there into the world. Help other people, touch other people, wake up other people from their delusion. And that's that's your purpose. But ultimately, the first thing you have to do is wake up yourself from the delusion. And separation from God is delusion. So the whole Bible, from the point that Adam and Eve bite into the apple, is a dream. It's the dream of Adam and Eve and the history that stems from them, and all the things of the world, the history of the world, all the things that have happened. It's all the delusion of, it's all the kind of the dream of deluded people. The world we live in is the dream of deluded people who have been poisoned. And if everyone wakes up, then the dream ends. If we stop believing the dream and stop acting in response to the dream, stop reacting to the dream, and allow ourselves to be purified, or, how can I put this, healed. You've been poisoned and God is trying to heal you. You have been poisoned and God is trying to heal you. You've been poisoned by the venom of the snake, and the venom of the snake is in every single thought that hangs in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which is your conceptual mind, where you think. Stop biting into those apples, turn to God and ask Him to make you well again, to purify you from this venom that's in your system, that's in your mind, it's in your heart, it's in your veins. It's fear, which is the poison of the serpent, and it's got deep into your veins, and you need God to wake you up. So you have to turn to God, whether you believe in God or not. God is a reality, I guarantee you. And you need God, because you are under a delusion. You were walking with God in your early years. You walked with God, whether you can remember it or not. It doesn't matter. You walked with God, and you felt the presence of God. And then you entered into this conditioned reality that is given to you by your mother and father and all the people around you, who made you understand, or made you think you understood the world. That's the delusion. All of your understandings, this whole world that you understand in your mind, that's the delusion. The delusion, the sickness is in your mind, in your thoughts. And so you have to, first of all, stop listening to that voice, because you're still biting the apples, you're still poisoning yourself every single day, every time you enter into a thought, an understanding about yourself, about the world, about reality. Every thought is a delusion. So you need to stop listening to that voice, primarily, and then you need to walk away from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which means going towards the tree of life, which is in the center of the garden, which is your heart. The tree of life is your heart, and that's where God speaks to you. And so you need to dwell there and become aware of the presence of God there, aware of God's communication. And then you can hear God, you can listen to God. When you're not listening to the voice of the serpent in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then you can hear the voice of God, and it's clear. But you've become desensitized to it because the serpent speaks on a different frequency, so to speak. And so you've tuned out of the frequency of God, listening to the serpent, and now you need to reattune to the voice of God, and that happens in your heart. That's why meditation is so important, because meditation allows you to retreat from all thoughts, become still and quiet. And when you're still and quiet, you can hear God's voice, and that's in your heart. So in meditation, you really need to bring your attention back to your heart. Relax your body, breathe, and become more aware of your heart. And you become aware of God's communication there. So it's all been a dream. And that, you could say the purpose of the dream, like the purpose of the Bible, which is a dream, is to remind you of God. So it's a story about how God proves himself. And right at the end, he has to come back. He comes into the dream as a human being, as a person, as a role, as a player in the dream, in the theatre. He comes back. He enters the stage as a person to say, wake up from this dream. This is who I am. This is my characteristic. I'm waiting for you. My role here is to wake you up. This has all been a bad dream. God awaits you. The kingdom awaits you. I am here. You don't need to do anything. Just listen to me. Stop listening to the voice of evil. And allow God to wake you up from the dream. And when you wake up from the dream, you'll realize, I'm still in the garden. I never left the garden. I was under a delusion. I imagined it all. And this is what will happen. As you allow God to purify your heart, which has to happen for you to wake up from the dream, He has to purify you, has to how can I say this? Push the venom out of your system. He has to purge you of the venom that's been in your system for so long, which means purifying your heart from the venom, purifying your body, getting the fear out, getting the darkness out that the venom has put there. And as that venom leaves, you start to wake up. You start to remember the presence of God and what God is like and what it's like to be with God, to walk with God. You start to remember. And then it becomes so much easier to let go, to realize you're dreaming and understand what's real and what's not real. What's the dream and what's reality? And essentially you can bring it down to this, that anything tainted with fear is the dream. If you're afraid, you're in the dream. If you're in joy and peace and trust, then you're in the vicinity of reality. And the more you dive into that peace, into that trust of God, into that love, sensitivity, vulnerability, and that joy, the more you dive into that, the more you wake up. And eventually there'll be a point where the dream no longer exists. You don't go back into the dream. You no longer choose the dream, the illusion, the delusion, which had been poisoning you for so long. You no longer go back there, and you dwell once more in the Garden of Eden. You look around you. You feel God's presence with you all the time, and you realize, I've woken up from the dream, and this is what awaits you.